If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism. So this morning, I'm having a cup of coffee, scrolling X to see what's going on out there, and I see this link that I'm like, this looks like clickbait, but I'm just compelled. That is sometimes like I can't not look. So I click through, and I discover that apparently the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci's painting the Mona Lisa, King Tut, Tutankhamun's death mask, and the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and half the psychedelic posters from 1967 all contain a secret, hidden, glowing Buddha figure that proves that we're living in the Matrix. Or it proves that ancient aliens were really into ayahuasca. And the wildest part is that this isn't some 3 a.m. crazy Reddit thread. The link went to a peer-reviewed paper in an academic journal. Yeah, stick with me, because by the time we're done, you're going to realize that the Catholic Church actually called this one about 19 centuries ago, maybe 20. So let's talk about the Buddhabrot. That's what it's called, the Buddhabrot. In order to talk about the Buddhabrot, we have to talk about fractals. So what is a fractal? Now, this is all about mathematics, and I got to confess, I'm not a huge math guy, but let me do my best to explain it. Most of us have seen a fractal, even if we didn't know that it was a fractal. So think of a snowflake, right? They put a snowflake on a microscope, you zoom in on one arm of the snowflake, and you see this little 6-pointed shape. And then if you zoom in even further, you see the same 6-pointed shape repeating smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller forever, because there's this mathematical formula, and the crystals in the snowflake form according to that mathematical formula, and then a bunch of those crystals clump together according to the same mathematical formula, and then those crystals clump together according to the same mathematical formula. So it's like the same shape all the way down. You can see the same thing in a coastline. So if you zoom in on a bay, you'll see it has a certain kind of shape. And then if you zoom in on a cove in the bay, it sort of follows the same shape rules. And then a pebble beach, and it never gets simple. It keeps staying wiggly in the same way at every scale. So at whatever scale you're at, the same sort of wiggly shape keeps repeating, or whatever the shape is, whether it's wiggly or 6-sided or 8-sided or whatever. It's like these repeating shapes at every scale. It's really weird. But that self-similarity at all scales, that the thing is built on this and built on this and built on this, it's like turtles all the way down, only it's the same shape all the way down. That's the hallmark of a fractal. Because there are these mathematical equations that dictate how things get formed, and then they scale up and down from that. That's the best explanation that I've been able to get about it. Okay? Now, the granddaddy of all of these fractal equations is something called the Mandelbrot set. It was discovered, or it was invented, depending on who you ask, by some guy named Benoit Mandelbrot in 1980. And it comes from this insanely simple equation. Again, I'm not a big math guy, but this is how I understand it. If you take a number, so z squared plus c, you take a number, square it, and add this other number, and you iterate that over and over and over, you're going to get this geometric pattern. And when you color the plane, the geometric plane on which this thing scales up and down, to color in the points that escape to infinity or stay bounded, what you end up with is this black bulb-shaped thing, kind of like a bloated bowling pin. And it's surrounded by all these infinite psychedelic halo of swirling shapes. And if you zoom in anywhere on the boundary of this psychedelic bowling pin, you'll find the same psychedelic bowling pin surrounded by the shapes. So you'll find baby Mandelbrots. And then if you zoom in on those, it'll be the same thing over and over. So apparently you see this in seahorse valleys, spiral galaxies, whatever. It's literally this infinite complexity of a one-line equation that gets repeated in nature over and over. Okay, I know I'm probably losing half of you, but stick with me because there's a payoff here. Now, in the 1990s, a mathematician named Melinda Green figured out a different way to render the same set. So in plotting that Mandelbrot equation thing on a geometric plane, instead of coloring the points inside the bloated bowling pin, she tracked the points that escape and where they go. And apparently if you do that for billions of points and you keep plotting them, you got to use a huge computer to do this, and you keep plotting and plotting and plotting them, something really weird emerges. You get this shape that's like this glowing. Edges are glowing because they fade, right? You know, the distribution of the points kind of fades out. So it's this kind of glowing looking shape that's like a seated figure with crossed legs and arms and kind of a big round fat belly and a little top knot man bun on the head. And it's weird because it looks exactly like a meditating Buddha, like a fuzzy, out of focus meditating Buddha. And so they called it the Buddhabrot. Next, enter a guy named Thomas Shirley in 2024-2025. And he takes these high resolution Buddhabrot renders, which I guess you got to get out of some monster computer, right? And then what this guy did, and this is what was described in the peer-reviewed article that I clicked through to, is he started laying this Buddhabrot shape over all of these famous images. So he takes the Mona Lisa, and if you lay this Buddhabrot shape over the Mona Lisa, it sort of lines up perfectly with her folded arms and her veil and the folds of her dress. And the little top knot on the Buddhabrot sits exactly where her hair bun is. If you lay the Buddhabrot shape over Michelangelo's creation of Adam in the Sistine Chapel, then God's swirling cloak and all the angels inside of it form the same sort of shape. And Adam's relaxed, reclining body is sort of the lower half of it. Like it all kind of lines up with this basic Buddhabrot shape. And he laid it over King Tut's golden death mask. And all of the headdress stripes and the little cobra and vulture on the forehead all kind of line up with this Buddhabrot shape. And you can go through all of these other famous pieces of art from around the world. Even some like psychedelic Grateful Dead posters, whatever. You just see this shape that kind of weirdly lines up with all these great pieces of art. And, you know, you got to read this. I clicked through this paper and you read it and it's weird. You can't unsee it once you've seen it. Now, let's be clear. Humans have been doing this forever, right? They look at a water stain on the wall and they see something that's some recognizable thing. Or I remember on Mars, when the, whatever it is, Voyager or something took pictures, or whatever's up there now, little robot satellite thing takes pictures and it looks like a face, you know, in a rock. You know, the whole thing about the golden ratio, people point out that every credit card, you know, is in exactly the right golden ratio. You see this Fibonacci sequence with a nautical shell nautilus shells repeated everywhere, even in the Vatican staircase, right? I mean, people have always been finding these kinds of mathematically perfect shapes and ratios and means in the universe, and the creation around them and in a piece of art. But this one about the Buddhabrot was like, huh. I literally could not do this without you, because this show is 100% listener supported. There are no ads, no sponsors. So if the episodes are helping you to understand the faith, to answer your questions, or draw you closer to historic Catholic Christianity, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra conversations, video Q&As, deep dives, live streams, behind the scenes, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. Together, we're educating, equipping, and exciting people about the beauty of the Catholic faith. So, what are the going explanations for the Buddhabrot thing and all this art? Well, in the article and in the commentary on it, there seem to be three kind of predominant explanations for why this thing turns up everywhere. The first comes from Jungian, I think I'm saying that right, the psychological theories of Carl Jung. And in that, it's that the Buddhabrot is an archetype, because that's what Jungian psychology is all about. That we have these like archetypes, in the deep parts of our brain. They're sort of baked into the collective unconscious. So in this theory, all the great artists around the world and other cultures and everything else, they all are sort of tapping into the same psychic basement, the collective unconsciousness, and this Buddha shape that's down in the basement just kind of leaks out and finds its way into all their art. Okay, that's one theory that people are throwing around the internet today. The second one is the psychedelic ancient astronaut thing. So somehow the ancient aliens that came and like moved the rocks around at Stonehenge or something, that's what they looked like. And we all sort of remember them. Or all of our psychedelic journeys with ayahuasca and, psychic mushrooms and all this stuff kind of taps into our deep, psychedelic consciousness or whatever. And it all causes us to draw the same weird shape. The third theory is something called simulation theory. And this is crazy anyway, that there's a lot of people out there on the internet that talk about how we're all living in a computer simulation, like a giant video game invented by aliens. And we're like the non-player characters inside a giant video game, which is a crazy, crazy religious origin story, right? But there's people out there saying this, and they're like, well, look, see, what we're doing is we're finding like little hints of that, all these mathematical things in the algorithm. So, the universe runs on these Mandelbrot algorithms, and artists are unconsciously sort of channeling the source code. And the alien game developers thought it would be hilarious to put Easter eggs everywhere that look like a Buddha. Those are the three theories that are running around the internet about this Buddhabrot article thing. And they're all over, X and TikTok or whatever, pretty spicy stuff. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church, because I was going to get to the Catholic Church, because this is considering Catholicism. The Catholic Church is leaning back in a 2,000-year-old chair, sipping, monk brewed beer or whatever, going, yeah, we noticed. We already know about this. Because here's the Catholic difference, and I think it's massive. The Catholic Church does not say, wow, order and beauty just appeared. So, let's invent the weirdest story and explanation possible. The Catholic Church says, of course order and beauty appear, because the universe was spoken into being by a divine logos, by a word who is himself truth and goodness and beauty personified. I've talked on the show a lot about the transcendentals, truth and goodness and beauty, which are these inherent qualities of God. So St. Thomas Aquinas, building on St. Augustine, building on Plato, building on Moses and St. Paul, they all taught that every being, simply by existing, participates in three properties that belong in full only to God. God has them in perfection, and that's truth and goodness and beauty. And beauty is the one that's relevant to this conversation. Beauty is not a cultural construct. It's the splendor of being when it's seen rightly. We recognize something that's beautiful because it transcendentally is beautiful, because it's a reflection of the inherent beauty of the Creator. So Thomas Aquinas literally says that beauty is quod visum placet, that which being seen pleases. In other words, when you see it, you know it. And what is it that pleases? Certain proportions and clarities and radiance. Splendor formae, the shining forth of form. Okay? Certain shapes and forms and things are naturally pleasing because they are resonant of that transcendent beauty that is in the divine logos. And it pleases us because we were made in the image of God, of the beautiful one. Our soul is what the Latin theologians called capex Dei, capable of God. So when we encounter something that participates strongly in the transcendent beauty of God, it rings a bell inside of us that was tuned in Eden. And so music in a certain key, a story that ends with the eucatastrophe, that's J.R.R. Tolkien's word, a painting whose proportions make your chest tighten, those aren't accidents. They're traces and reminders of our true home and our Creator. Great art does not tell us that beauty exists. We already feel homesick for it. Great art tells us that beauty can be found, it can be courted, and it can ultimately be met face to face. And that's why certain shapes and ratios and patterns in nature keep showing up across continents and millennia, because they're more true to the structure of being, the creation as it was set up. So if you look in Euclidean geometry, certain circles, golden rectangles, harmonic overtones, pi, the Fibonacci number, golden means, all of these things, the Buddhabrots, they're all mathematically closer to the way that the divine logos thinks. So an artist who's really paying attention, whether he's a Christian or not, will always gravitate towards those things the way that a plant grows toward the light. So Leonardo da Vinci didn't sit down and say, today I will encode a, Mandelbrot fractal. He sat down and tried to paint the most harmonious, living, perfectly proportioned, mysterious face that he could imagine. And harmony, by definition, is going to echo the deep structures of reality, because reality was made by a harmonious God. And so as Da Vinci is painting the Mona Lisa, he's sort of organizing it in the most pleasing way possible, because the most pleasing way possible is something that reminds us at a subconscious level of the transcendent beauty of God that's throughout the creation. His fingerprints are all over the things he's made. The same thing with Michelangelo. Michelangelo was obsessed with the human body as the image of God. And if you carve enough perfect torsos and swirling drapery, you're going to stumble into the same proportions that these kinds of mathematical formulas end up expressing. Not because the Vatican had a supercomputer in 1512 and he ran simulations, but because both the human body and these fractals all are downstream of the same artist, the divine Logos, the second person of the Trinity, who spoke all things into being with order and truth and goodness and beauty. And that's why conversion stories so often begin with beauty. So you can have a hardcore atheist who walks into Chartres Cathedral, or he hears Bach's St. Matthew Passion, or he reads J.R.R. Tolkien at just the right moment in his life, and something in the soul says, I recognize this. And that recognition is the first crack in the dam. Beauty is often the Trojan horse that the Holy Spirit uses to smuggle truth and goodness into our hearts, which are locked down. St. Paul says in Romans chapter 1 that men are without excuse because God's invisible attributes are clearly seen in the things that have been made. But notice the order that Paul points out. We suppress the truth first, and then our minds become darkened so that we can no longer read the signposts correctly. And when the mind is healed, yes, by grace, but often beauty is the instrument that grace uses, the opening act, those same signposts become clear to us again. We start to see things around us that remind us at some deep, deep level that this is beautiful and attractive because it's reminding us of who made us and what we were made for. So, these fractals and Fibonacci numbers and golden means and all of these things aren't like the alien game developers hiding Easter eggs. They're the creator signing the canvas of the universe that he painted with his own blood and inviting us to know him again. And that's the story that actually explains the resonance in our chest when we look at the Mona Lisa and we feel it's perfect. Thanks for listening. If this episode lit even a small candle in the dark for you, do me a favor. Send it to the smartest skeptic you know and see what happens. See you next time, and in the meantime, keep considering Catholicism. We'll be back with another episode very soon. And this show is 100% listener supported. My patrons keep the lights on, and they let me spend more time researching and recording so that these episodes keep coming. If this show has helped you, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra video Q&As, deep dive courses, live streams, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. And would you please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're using and write a review on Apple Podcasts or on consideringcatholicism.com. And you can drop me a line. Patrons can comment directly on Patreon posts or Spotify. I read every one. Or you can always use the contact form at consideringcatholicism.com, or you can email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. I love hearing your questions, your comments, and your stories.